Hi, everybody. Welcome. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Andy Blanco, and I'm with Riverside Insights. Thank you for taking the time to join us today for this webinar entitled How to Start and Scale Social Emotional Learning in Your District. And before we get started, I just want to do a few quick announcements, some housekeeping here. There we go. Please, during the presentation, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in the questions panel. It should look something like this, depending on your platform, and we'll address them as we are able. A recording of today's presentation and a certificate of attendance, along with some relevant links, will be sent to all registrants by the end of this week. The recordings from this and from our previous webinars can also be found on our website here at info.riversideinsights.com/K12PD. Don't worry about remembering all that or taking it down. It will be in the email as well as the recording. So with that now, it is my pleasure to introduce our esteemed panelists for today. We have Donna Black, excuse me. She is president of SEL for Texas. She's also the author of Essentials of Social Emotional Learning. We also have Dr. Byron McClure. He is the founder of Lessons for SEL. He's a national certified school psychologist. He is the author of Hacking Deficit Thinking. And we also have Rochelle Fink. She is the director of guidance and counseling at Taylor ISD in Taylor, Texas, just northeast of Austin, correct?
We are.
So thank you three for joining us here today. And I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into our topics here. So first off, what does SEL mean and why does it matter? Before we get to the how, the what and why. Somebody want to jump in with that?
You want us to just jump in, right?
Yeah, just jump in.
Okay, I'll start us off here. You know, I would say that it's really hard to define what SEL is because there are many definitions out there about what it is. Definitively, SEL really is a process, and it's a process that schools can use to enhance learning and help youngsters develop skills that they are going to need for life. Not only skills that they need to function in the schoolroom, in the classroom, but the skills they're going to need to find employment and to lead happy and productive lives. So in a nutshell, it is that process that schools have to incorporate into their whole learning process. And it's very complex. It's not as simple as it sounds. There are a lot of challenges that schools face when they do it. And there are some tenets to SEL that have to be laid first. And schools need to address those things like school culture and climate, things like making sure that the instruction is developmentally appropriate, and many other things. So I'm gonna let my colleagues here jump in and add to that. I know that's not comprehensive, but that's kind of the nutshell version.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Well, let me be respectful, Rachel. I want to cede space and elevate your voice first, and then I'll follow up after you, if that's okay.
I was going to say the same thing to you. But I think when I talk to teachers and principals, you know, for the longest time in education, there was this main focus on academics, right? As a middle school math teacher, moving test scores mattered. But when I think about the way we are incorporating SEL into schools and campuses, it really is this return to seeing kids as people first, right? It's this return to human-centered education, where we understand that kids are people, right? From our 4-year-olds in our pre-K classrooms to our 12th grade, about to be, you know, out in the workforce of the post-secondary education. Kids are humans, and we've got to treat them like humans and not like a test score or like accountability. And it's a big mindset shift for a lot of individuals. But I think we are slowly starting to see that happen in a lot of ways. And we'll talk about ways that happens in a little bit. But you know, I think we've kind of been catapulted to make this happen in a lot of ways as well, just because of the nature of our world right now.
Yeah, and I think Donna and Rachelle are both right. I think Donna has more of the textbook definition of it. If you look at Zenz and Elias, like they provide what is SEL, and just to that process point, I'll just add, because you captured it perfectly, that it's a process, how I conceptualize it, from birth all the way throughout one's a lifespan. And across this process, like you're developing these skills. And so to me, it's this social emotional development. I'm a psychologist, so that developmental component is super critical. And to Rachelle's point, some of the work that I did in DC, we leveraged this human-centered design way, how we approach our work. And Rachelle is right. It's a process that puts people first. And so seeing the humanity in one another, recognizing the needs, and then helping our young people to acquire the skill sets, the mindsets that they need to be successful, to navigate the world around them, and to be culturally responsive and to give back to their community so that they can be productive citizens.
You know, it's kind of interesting. I'd like to just add to that here, how each of us has a very different perspective, but yet every one of our all three of our perspectives meld together. They're congruent. And I think that's because when we think about SEL, we don't think about it in terms of, like, let me just rephrase that. I think people have a hard time understanding what it is. It is something that we've been struggling with now for quite some time. And it's because, like I said, the definition, you can define it, but how do you quantify it? And that's a real issue in schools. They want something quantified because, as Rachelle said, we have to be held accountable, right? And we need accountability measures. We need ways to quantify what we're teaching. But SEL is so much bigger than that. It's not about any one thing. And we tend to think of it as, how are we going to set up a program to address SEL? And how are we going to address the instruction? When in reality, it's really about instruction, the pragmatics of instruction, but it's also about systems change. So there's multiple approaches that can be used for schools as they begin to scale up, but you can't just look at it from that one perspective. You have to look at it from multiple angles.
Fantastic. Well, and I mean, without healthy SEL, your achievement isn't gonna, right? Don't we have the numbers? Don't we have research on that? That's a whole separate conversation, of course. And boy, we could really go down that rabbit hole, but perhaps a topic for a future.
Another day.
But as we're talking about SELs, we're talking about implementing it. What are the concerns that you're hearing? I got listed here. We want to talk about the top three, but obviously there are more than that. Parent buy-in is something that we've talked about. I know. I'm sorry, I'm here out here with the spoilers. I will let you folks. What are the top three or the top concerns that you're hearing about implementing SEL in the classroom?
I think for starters, it's what Donna just mentioned in the very first question that you asked. You asked three people, what is SEL? You'll get three different definitions. And because there has been variation on how we're defining SEL, that translates into confusion around implementation, which translates into problematic implementation. And when you can't implement something when you don't understand what it is, not only does it not scale, but people abandon it. And then people will say, well, that's not effective. But we understand the research. We understand that when it is implemented with fidelity and with all of the things that we'll discuss here in a minute, we know that there's positive impacts from it, that it increases academic achievement, it can increase pro-social behavior, it can reduce conduct problems, it can reduce emotional distress, but we can't get past any of those things because we can't land on a set definition. So that's problem number one. And then I'll pass it to my colleagues. But the other thing that I quickly wanted to mention is this boogeyman that has been created, this this discussion around CRT and then lumping everything that people don't like underneath that umbrella. And unfortunately, SEL has been lumped in that umbrella, and people are moving away from SEL. And that's creating very real problems for our field.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I totally agree, Byron. And I think, we can get in, we won't get into it, but we could get into all of the political chaos that's going on there with regard to the attacks on SEL. But I think that what we really have to understand, and hopefully we can get folks to begin to seek out correct information rather than the misinformation that you alluded to there. And if people will, use their own critical thinking skills and recognize that SEL is really a way of teaching every aspect of what the child needs to know. Gone are the days when we saw education as simply a way to improve math and reading and science scores. It's more than that. We know that according to the World Economic Forum, they've already issued what employers are looking for. And there are 16 critical skills that these kids need to have before they leave us. And of those 16 skills, only 6 of them are literacy skills. The other 10 are those soft skills or the social and emotional skills that we are referring to. And if we're not preparing kids with those skills, that's what we're talking about when we're saying SEL. It's about skill development. It's teaching to the whole child, making sure that that children leave us and are ready for that workforce and are ready for life. A colleague of mine once said that if emotions are churning, they can't be learning. So think about that. The impact of the emotions and the social environment. I mean, kids don't learn in a vacuum. They learn through relationships and they learn through socialization. And the emotions are impacted. You can't isolate them. I'll let Rochelle chime in there because she has much to say about that, I'm sure.
I would agree with everything Byron and Donna have both said. I think if I were to hit the nail on 2 things that I see in implementing in schools, it's kind of 2 different ends of the spectrum, but very much connected. So the very first thing that I see is we're also, in order to teach SEL to students, we have to teach SEL to adults. And that's hard. It is like the example that I use during the pandemic when we were all sent home. I was a brand new mom to 2 kids. I was 6 weeks postpartum, trying to figure out how to do life with 2 kids and still managing SEL in a very large school district that looked to me to help move the work forward, right? We all knew we needed this, but I was struggling as an adult to manage my emotions, problem solve, do all of the things we ask kids to do. And yet this is what I do every day. So if I was struggling, I can only imagine what my teachers were dealing with. And to move the needle for adults takes time that sometimes we don't have the luxury of having, right? Sometimes there is a sense of urgency that we need to move quickly. And until we start that underground work that sometimes gets overlooked as like the adults will come. No, it's really hard for me to teach kids anger management when 10 seconds later, their adult in the room has become dysregulated and doesn't know how to manage that emotion. On the flip side of that, I would go into this idea of pre-service education. So working with our colleges and our teacher preparation programs, coming out of college, there is not a lot of information or a lot of strong instruction for hopeful educators on SEL or classroom management or trauma. None of these things are really embedded deeply into the work that schools are doing to prepare educators. So as teachers and as principals and as district leaders, we then have to do that. Well, that's great, but if they move into a system that is established, we almost have to go backwards and then to go forwards. And they are some of our most ripe teachers that are willing to do the work, but that's a lot of information for a brand new teacher to take in on top of curriculum, on top of all of the other things with coming to a new school district. If that's one thing that we can start that work 4 years before they even get into a classroom, we have done pivotal work to move the needle for kids and to speed up that trajectory for where they're going to be.
Rachel, that's so important. And Andy, I know we got some other questions we have to get to, but some of the work that I did in DC, and I love that you said human-centered design, because we were redesigning a school, and that's the process that we used. And we had to tap into change management, and how do we influence systems levels change? And what I learned very quickly as we started in year one, my focus was on the student experience. My title was a student experience coach. By year two, I became the assistant director of redesign, and I learned very quickly that I can't tap into the student experience and make a difference without equipping our staff by addressing their needs. So everything that Rachel said is important. And if we are doing this at the school level, the reality is it might be too late. Can we still make change? Yes. Will it be more difficult? Absolutely. So I love, Rachel, that you talked about getting into graduate prep programs, into training programs, and equipping our teachers, our psychologists, our counselors, our social workers with these skills before they enter into the field. What does that mean at the school level? We also have to be having a conversation about our hiring practices as well, but I'll stop there.
Well, I'd like to piggyback on that, because what you both alluded to is the problem we see in the research to practice gap, because we do have a huge gap in what teachers are being trained to do and what they're being asked to do when they get into the school classroom. That's the very reason why I wrote the book I wrote. The Essentials book is really designed for teacher prep programs so that teachers are better prepared as they enter the workforce. So yes, that gap is huge, and we're asking teachers to do something for which we have not adequately prepared them.
Well, and teacher wellness, also a concern that has to be addressed. You've all alluded to that. Well, and certainly the rate at which teachers are turning over and moving districts and moving schools adds to the significant challenge of that.
Well, and even greater than that is the challenge of leadership, because many school leaders aren't well informed either, and have also not been well prepared for SEL. Many of them don't know how to lead that process. And so it goes all the way up to the top. It's not just the teachers, it's the leaders as well. And we know that in one of the key components of a successful SEL implementation is strong leadership.
Yes.
So it's pretty
100%.
pervasive.
That's a great segue. Getting the leadership buy-in and making the right plans for SEL. What does that look like? What are the most relevant components of a successful program?
I think for a lot of leaders, it starts with getting them to experience what it feels like at the kid level. So for example, if I want teachers leading Strong Start every morning in their classrooms, and that looks like a warm opening and checking in with kids, as a district leader, my number one goal is to make sure my principals are experiencing that every time they meet with me, because that's my opportunity to model for them. And then in turn, they are modeling for their staff those same practices, because it just becomes a part of the way we do things. So for example, in Taylor ISD and in my previous district in Round Rock ISD, we have a framework that I basically embed into every single meeting. If you meet with me for a check-in, I just had a meeting with all of my behavior staff. We went through this same process. Our principals meetings start with an authentic greeting. They come from Castle's signature practices, but they start with an authentic greeting, which means I am at the door before you walk in here. And I'm saying, Andy, I am so glad to see you today. Even if a day like today happens and we got double booked and I hadn't had my coffee and I didn't have my makeup on, it doesn't matter. You stop, you take a breath, and you say, Donna, I'm so glad to see you today. How are you? And we then go in and we do our work. And then we start with a warm opening, which is typically some kind of check-in. How are you doing? For me, I use the Ruler mood meter every single time I meet with teachers, and I meet with, like, it's up here on my wall, framed and ready to go. Pick a word, pick a song, tell me how you're doing, because that gives me critical components for my information moving forward. We ask engaging and essential reflective questions to even just ask, what's your intention for today? Stop and journal and tell me what's one thing that stuck out for you. And we do not end without an optimistic closure. Typically, in the month of October and November, it's find something good that's happened today and send it to somebody, because we know morale is low in October and November. We know this. But it gets them in that idea of, like, as they walk out the door. Whenever I meet with principals, it's what's the one thing you're going to walk out of here and go tell someone about, because then they have to have something happen. But we follow that same structure in campus meetings. They follow that same structure in the classroom, whether it's a full day of elementary, mini blocks within the day, or individual class periods throughout the course of secondary. It's the same structure. So as kids go between campuses, there is a consistency that they experience. But that didn't start until we did it with principals and until we did it with district leaders, because they had to feel it first. It had to become concrete and tangible for them. Otherwise, it's just this thing that Rochelle does because she's the warm, fluffy, friendly people. There's science, it's trauma informed, and it's what helps our kids.
Isn't she phenomenal? I just have to say what she does, what she's done. She did this in Round Rock before she went to Taylor, and she's just incredible about the implementation process. I will tell you that Rochelle and I, we complement each other real well, because she really does see the implementation from the practical, pragmatic perspective, and I see it from the systemic perspective. So all of the things that she talked about, for those out there in the audience who really see SEL as something that's implemented in a lockstep manner, I hate to break it to you, but it's not done in a lockstep manner. It's really done, it's coordinated, and a coordinated approach. It's a systemic approach. So while you're doing all of these things to address instruction, to address the emotions and the socialization of kids, you also have to be addressing your systems issues. You have to be looking at your policies. You have to be determining where policies conflict. You have to be looking at your data. You have to know how that data can inform your processes. And all of that data that you have it's incredibly important. And many of our schools don't know how to look at the data, first of all, from a social and emotional perspective. And secondly, they don't know how to analyze the data from that perspective. So we tend to only look at our data from an academic achievement perspective or from a behavioral perspective, but that data can tell us so much more. So
can you just travel with me everywhere and tell people that last statement there, that there's so much more in that data?
Yeah, and training the school leaders in how to look at that data from a different perspective and how to apply that data, that information, to help inform your decisions. We've lived decades now with data driving every decision we make, and I say it doesn't drive our decisions, it just simply informs those decisions. And when we have good data, we can make better decisions if we know how that data is interpreted and analyzed.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor this question, but in my experience, the question can be misleading, and that has got a lot of schools and districts in trouble. What I mean by that is people will select programs and think they're doing SEL, and I found that's not the case. And the danger of that, people will go to the CASEL website. They provide a ton of resources. They'll go to the CASEL Select Guide. I did my dissertation, my research on it, so I love what's there. I love the resources, but they'll blindly close their eyes and pick one of those programs and say, we're doing SEL, but then they can't sustain it. It doesn't last. Why? Because that's not SEL. It's just a program.
Mhm.
What we have to be able to give consideration to is our context. Who are our students? Who are our school leaders? Who are the parents? What are their needs? So there has to be an investigation, a deep understanding of the needs of the current school community. If you don't do that, everything else is going to fail. I just have to be honest with you all. Once
Absolutely.
you can and bringing in needs assessments, bringing in student surveys, getting out of your office and talking to students. What is it that you need? One of the things that is so simple, at least to me, and we get it wrong every time, we're telling kids what will be successful for you. And we're not asking kids. So ask kids, what will make whatever the issues are, whatever you're dealing with, what does success look like to you? What is it that you need in this moment? And then go about meeting those needs. So there has to be a groundwork before we can even get to SEL programming. And I love this. I heard it at a conference that I was in. They talked about practices over programs. And I think Rachel was headed in that direction. If we're only focused on programs, we're only doing one component. But when we extend out to practices, when we extend out to what are the policies, what are the practices that we have, what are the decisions, how are we making decisions, how are we getting youth voice, how are we getting all these different elements? Now we're talking about an SEL system. Now we're talking about systemic change. Then putting all of these things together within a structured framework that you can then utilize year after year and scale up. Now we're implementing all of these different elements into a structured framework. You can integrate it into your comprehensive school plans. In DC, we call it our CSPs. And now, are we measuring it? Are we doing what we said we want to do? If not, how do we know we're not doing it? You have to be able to measure what you're doing along the way. But to answer the question, I can answer the question just very quickly. What makes a program effective? It's a simple acronym, SAFE. And Castle has designated this. Are your programs, are they giving you sequence activities? Are they active forms of learning? I love programs that are engaging and have different modalities of learning. Are you giving focused time to where this is what we're going to focus on in this moment? And is it explicitly tapping in to those core SEL skills or whatever skills that you want in your school community? And then some other components from my research that I found are critical. Are they providing training to the staff, to parents? You can't deliver a SEL program if you're just saying, all right, here's this SEL curriculum, go and implement it. It's going to fail 99% of the time. Are you providing training? Are you providing ongoing training where it's not just the one and done, but it's continuous support? And are these curriculums responsive to the need of the school communities? And that goes back to understanding data and being informed. We can't, again, go to these Castle websites, select a program without researching who was it normed on. Who, if we want to talk about it, we could talk about it. And then we're picking these curriculums that's only one component and then giving it to kids. It was normed on kids in rural Wisconsin and giving it to kids in inner city Oakland. It's going to fail 99% of the time. So we have to be very considerate about what we're doing.
You know, I couldn't agree more with what Byron's saying. All of this is addressed in my book if you care to read it. Professional development, though, is absolutely a critical component, and it's really one of the biggest things that's missing right now. Our staff just are not being given opportunities to increase their knowledge and their skills through professional development. But as Byron was saying, we can't just cherry pick. If you cherry pick a program without doing thorough investigation of the program, who it was normed on, who it was designed for, and without getting the data you need to support that program's ongoing success, then you're going to fail. And we see this happening in districts all across the nation, where they're not recognizing that there is no one size that fits all. Every school community is different, and every school community will have different needs. So one program that works well in Wisconsin may not work well in Seattle. So we have to think about how that program was developed, who it was developed with, and whether or not it was normed. If it was a norm, if there's a measurement tool with it, was it normed on different populations of students? That's so very important. That's the so systemic process we're talking about. When we talk about systems, one of the things that I want to just add to what Byron was saying is that we also have to look at classrooms, individual classrooms. And within those classrooms, are teachers really thoroughly in looking at their instruction, their curriculum, and their environment and environmental routines before they're making claims that children aren't learning? We see every day children being sent over to special ed for a referral because teachers in classrooms are not able to manage classrooms, have not looked at whether or not the instruction is appropriate for the student, whether or not the curriculum is appropriate, whether they're managing routines and expectations in the classroom well. But children are often identified as the problem when in fact it's these other environmental issues that haven't been addressed appropriately. And so we have to look at our processes more thoroughly before we start making assumptions that the problem lies with our student. It isn't always the student. So I just wanted to add that little piece in there.
So here's a peripherally related question. How important is parent buy-in? And if the answer is very, very important, how do you go about getting it?
Well, parent buy-in is critical. I'm sure Rochelle has been addressing that in her district though, because they have a good, strong parent contingency there, don't you, Rochelle?
We do. I will tell you that this is an area in which we are tapping into. So we are really only in year one of our implementation at a district-wide systemic level. However, I think if we go back to the idea of person-centered education, we also need to understand that like if we open for so long our doors were closed, right? No one can come in. You must have a mask. Our doors, the buildings are closed to everybody. But now we're starting to open our doors back up again. And so when parents come in, what does that feeling look like for them? How are they received? What does my front office look like? What is my front office staff demeanor when a parent comes in that may not speak English? Is there someone that can readily translate or readily speak to them in their native language? And if not, do I have the tools that I need? But also it's being able to really look at what is the experience for parents when they come in for faculty or for parent-teacher conferences. What does it look like? Am I talking about all the things their kid is doing wrong, or am I giving you a balance of these are their strengths, this is where they're really great at, here are some areas where we have some growth, because everybody has an opportunity to grow, but rather than harping on all of the things that are negative about kids, because at the end of the day, even as a parent, if I were to walk into a meeting, someone that lives and breathes this every day, and you told me everything that was wrong with my 5-year-old, I'm going to get defensive, and I might not be the nicest person. But if you're giving me an opportunity to share what she's really great at and share what's happening, and you tell me why you love my kid, and my kid comes home and tells me how much she loves going to school, I'm going to be a little bit more receptive to hearing what's happening in the classroom. I will also say that as a parent, I use everything that we do with both of my children. I have a 5-year-old and a soon-to-be 3-year-old. I wish I could tell you that this works like magic with my kids at home, but I have children, and it doesn't. There are some days that are great, and there are some days that I have to go, can I do that again? Right? Like I got dysregulated. Can I try again? Because I'm also teaching them. And so we have to give parents some grace too, to understand that they send us their greatest gift every day, and they trust us to take care of their kids every day. And at the end of the day, parents just want to be heard. And so bringing them into the fold, bringing them into the decision-making process, and giving them a voice at the table goes far beyond a newsletter sent home, a conversation at the beginning of the year, and really making it about who you are, not just, I'm going to check the box and send this home and say it was my parent engagement for the day. And now I
So,
leave it off.
Rochelle, what do you think about? I've really shifted my thinking over the last several decades, and we tend to view kids as having deficits, rather than viewing all the assets and strengths they bring to the table. And many times when you're talking with parents, we tend to want to focus on what they're not doing right, rather than on what they are doing right. And how do you address that with your staff? How do you help them to see that parents don't want to hear what's wrong with their children? They want to hear what they're doing right as much as they want to hear where they need to focus on some of the problems.
I'm going to give you my Cliff Notes version, and then I'm going to kick it over to Byron because I have a feeling he's got lots to say on that. But I think the biggest thing, it goes back to the adults. If I am a school leader that is doing the same thing for my teachers, I'm pouring into what they're doing well. My coaching conversations very much feel that same structure of, yes, this went really well when I was in here. Here's 2 or 3 things we might need to do, and we're going to do it together. And then give them an opportunity to have voice at the table. They're more likely to do that in the classroom because they are engaged and they enjoy their job, right? Happy teachers make happy kids. Happy kids make happy parents. And so if we take care of our adults and we use that same opportunity with them, I think it's also giving them a template, right? I'm not going to send a parent into a parent-teacher conference with someone that I haven't already either had a conversation with or coached about this is what this is going to look like. If this is a protocol we are using, I'm giving you opportunities to practice before you actually have to get in front of a parent that may or may not be on the most receiving end. And then also having the opportunity to say, like, if you need support, I will be right next to you and I'll do this with you. Because that goes a really long way as a campus leader as well. But I'm going to let Byron do all the things and speak his magic, because I have a feeling he's got some great things to say.
Yeah, and it's a topic that I found was important to address because it became a barrier for parents, for students, for educators, and even for people in their personal lives. And this barrier is this concept of deficit thinking. And what deficit thinking is, to me, it's a distorted lens of viewing the absolute worst in people. And it's distorted because it's not necessarily accurate. It's not true. It's based off of faulty thinking and stereotypes and misperceptions. And it's a dangerous belief because it puts these beliefs on people and then it becomes true. And because it becomes true, it's enacted through practices and policies. And what this looks like inside of schools is parents don't want to be involved because they don't care about their kids, or the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, or that kid is lazy, or that kid is in all these labels and things. And then it trickles down. And if we're not careful, it can become this self-fulfilling prophecy is, I am all these things, so I am going to become all of these things and act out in all of these different ways. I want to make this very clear. What this looks like inside of schools, I'm a psychologist, and so a big part of what psychologists do is evaluations and evaluating to determine if kids are eligible to receive special education services. I've sat in hundreds of meetings, maybe even thousands of meetings, going around the IEP table in Texas. They're called ARD meetings. Every single educator is sending darts to that parent. What your kid can't do, what your kid will never be able to do, the limitations, the weaknesses, deficit, deficit, deficit. I sat in a meeting, and every person who says something about that child was negative. Not just negative, it was heart-wrenching, painful. And I could see it was like a dagger going into the heart of that mom who sat right to my left. And by the time it got to me to read this 30-page evaluation, which, by the way, as psychologists, we are trained in tools to identify the absolute worst in people, to identify skill deficits and weaknesses and what people can't do. And when we're talking about deficit thinking, it's lopsided because that's who you are and that's how we operate from. And so by the time it got to me, this parent could not hear another negative thing about her child. She would have broke down in that meeting. And what happens is parents go about their day hearing this. Their interactions become this negative exchange, and they disconnect and they disengage. And then it becomes this cycle. Well, those parents don't want to be involved. Those parents don't care about the kids. They have been harmed. And we're not in the business of repairing harm, but that's another conversation. And so in this conversation about deficit thinking, we have to shift away from that. And we don't have to accept that as true, because it's not. What if in these meetings, in these IP meetings, we start with your child can do all of these things? Are we going into classrooms? Are we bringing in what they do well, their strengths, what they're naturally good at? Are we being balanced in our approach? I want to be crystal clear, because I am a psychologist. There are very real disabilities and challenges that our young people face. But how can we shift away from only identifying the worst to creating a holistic view of our children, of their families, of their communities, of where they come from, to say, yes, you might struggle with math calculations or math fluency, or you might be inattentive, and these are very real things, but you are very strong with counting money and understanding how economics work. So we are going to bring these things so that you learn. Now we're talking about social emotional learning. How are we teaching our kids? What are we placing value in? And in this approach, we have to move away from this deficit ideology. And this is where we introduce this strength-based approach, helping people to identify their strengths, what they're strong at, understanding that it takes a community approach. It's the sense of collectivism, that there's social capital and resources, and that while we might have deficits, that we can bring other people to help us balance those things out. How can we bring parents into this conversation, community partners, mental health advocates and agencies, so that we can meet the needs of people? And ultimately, that's what we're talking about. And Andy, I think we're going to get there. But in a nutshell, we can shift away from what's wrong and we can shift towards what's strong.
I need to add to that though, Byron, because I want to be clear for our special educators that are on this, who might be on this webinar. We understand that there are eligibility decisions that have to be made with children with disabilities. And in order to be eligible for those services, we have to identify the deficits. What I think what Byron and I are trying to say is that it's not just about identifying the deficits, though that's important because we have to do that to receive the services. But we also have to take it one step further and really look at the strengths that those youngsters can bring to the table and do bring to the table. And then how do we set up a program, an individual program for them that addresses not just the deficit areas, because in reality, disabilities, you can't fix a disability. You don't fix it, it doesn't go away. You teach children how to use the skills that we help them build so that they can learn to compensate for the areas where their deficits are. So they have to learn the social and emotional skills as much as any other student does. And in many ways, we have to be able to do that from a developmental perspective, because not only do children with disabilities have developmental delays in many instances, they also need more intensive interventions because they have not had the building blocks to learning that many other youngsters have had. So just to be clear though, we're not saying that we need to abandon all of the deficits based identification processes, because that's required by federal law. But we have to take it to that next level, and we have to do programming that really plays on their strengths and builds on those strengths.
Yeah, and I want to be clear on what I am saying. For too long in education, we have been hyper focused on identifying the worst in people. What I am saying is that there is an alternative to that, and that alternative is being holistic. We can create a picture where we understand that, yes, as Donna is saying, these deficits might be here, but you are not your deficits. You are not the worst version of yourself. How can we leverage what you're strong at, what your gifts at, the resources around you? How can we create this comprehensive, holistic view so that we can use those skills so that you can be successful? And going back to the definition of SEL, navigate the world around you.
Yeah.
I told you he'd have great things to say. It's kind of amazing.
All right, so we've talked about the definition. We've talked about the need to audit, not arbitrarily place a program. We've talked about, what it looks like to different audiences. The last thing I've got on my list here, how do we measure success? Donna's going to point at Rochelle here at this point, I think, but I think we maybe want to quantify that a little bit more.
Well, I actually think I would not point to Rochelle on this, because as a trained school psychologist, I mean, I'm all about measuring. So
Okay,
and
all
it
right.
goes back to the data-driven and data-informed approach. I think we measure that success. Again, we have to individualize it for each school community, because how do you know it's successful? It's not just about whether or not the skills are developing in youngsters, but whether or not the system itself is improving. So I think we have to look at the outcomes for students and the outcomes for the system as well, and if those outcomes are improving. And I'm thinking, in terms of behavioral outcomes, are we lowering our disproportionality data? Is that an area in which we really need to be focused on? Because most schools that I'm familiar with and have worked with have real problems with disproportionate discipline issues. And if that discipline data is not changing, then that may be an area in which we need to target more focus. So again, it's all about data, what areas of data you need to be collecting and analyzing, and looking at how it's influencing not just student outcomes, but system outcomes as well.
I think anecdotally, right, Donna always does a great job of talking about all of the data points. And as a former math teacher and mathematician, like, data is my language. But at the end of the day, I can walk through a campus and see kids enjoying school. When kids come to school as a kindergartner, they love their teacher. They love being at school. And by the time they hit middle school, something happens. Besides hormones, something happens that disconnects them from that joy of education. And we've got to get back to that. And I think the number one reason for that, just like Byron said, we've got to see what's right. We've got to see what's going well. We pull groups of kids in and we say, like, what do you love most about school? And every single kid on my campus should be able to tell me something. And if they can't, that's a red flag. There is no reason why a kid should walk around to school, pre-K through 12, and not be able to tell me one thing they enjoy when they come to school. They spend 8 hours a day on our campuses. It is our responsibility to make sure it is a safe place, it is a healthy place, and it is a place that they want to be. Because if they don't want to be there, we also know that the flip side of that is by the time they turn 16, 17, 18, we might lose them. And we cannot afford that. So while we gather all of the data, I gather mental health data, I gather discipline data, I gather behavior referrals, I do all of this data. At the end of the day, the way students view school is my number one determinant of success. If my scores don't go up that year, they will, but if they don't go up that year, but my kids have said, I love coming to school, I've done my job. It's like mic drop, I'm out, I've done my job, because at that moment, my kids are in the win. Like, they're there and they've got it, and the rest will come.
And if they like it, their parents are happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that the data I'm talking about is that data, student surveys, parent surveys, all of that data is critical data to help you determine whether or not you're being successful. And we often neglect the parent component. We often neglect the student component. And those are very, very critical voices to be heard.
Yeah, I'll just add to that from my perspective and my work. I think Rochelle and Donna are both right. There's value in setting intentions at the beginning of the year. So working with your school leadership teams to say, okay, this is our goal for quarter one, quarter two, quarter three, quarter four, for the entire duration of the year. And when you do that, it allows you to answer the question, is what you're doing, is it working? And it allows you to develop programs specifically towards whatever it is that you want to do. So as an example, we, speaking with students, we created some qualitative surveys to get the perception of our students. What is the school experience like for you? Do you feel that you belong? How can we improve the school experience? And we listened to our students, and based on that, we heard that our kids didn't feel connected, that they didn't feel like they belonged at the school, amongst some other things. And so we prioritized those top 2 areas. We wanted to increase students' sense of belonging, and we wanted them to feel connected. We developed interventions around those 2 areas, and then we looked at, I don't know if I can mention names of surveys on here, but there were 2. We looked at Panorama data, and then I'm also a proponent of the DESA as well. It's a strength-based survey. Taps into some of those SEL components, but as well as some other strength-based domains. But really we leverage, because in Panorama, you could look at students' sense of belonging, you could look at their sense of connection and those things. Then everything we did, we were able to have different touch points throughout the year to see if we're making progress, and is what we're doing, is it working? And if not, we pivoted. And then building those data points into our comprehensive school plan, where we met with our school leadership team, we met with our district leaders as well, to see, is what we're doing, is it working? And how can we refine what we're doing as set touch points throughout the year as well?
I think one of the biggest things that Byron hits on is this idea of letting the system work and giving it the time that it needs to marinate, right? We all quote 11 points of academic growth, right?
Yeah.
Implement SEL, you'll get 11 points of academic growth, and people hold on to that. What they don't tell you is that takes 3 to 5 years.
Yes.
In cases,
Yes.
you're not going to see it. You might even see it decrease to then rocket forward. So making sure you understand exactly what you're seeing and giving systems time to work.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
if I may add to that, intentionality. It must be done intentionally. You can't just let it happen by default. If you do, something will happen, but it may not be what you want to happen. So everything we're talking about must be done intentionally.
All right, well, we're coming up on time here. Got about 5 minutes left. There are no questions in the panel currently. Any profound closing statements before I go into the book pitch here?
I've just thoroughly enjoyed hearing from my colleagues here how things have been progressing for them. So it's always nice to hear the other perspectives as well.
And any number of these conversation topics, we could have just spun off into a whole separate webinar. I mean, we never got that. I wanted to talk about older kids and how that, well, at any rate, that's.
I sent us down a rabbit hole, but I chose not to.
What's that?
But I almost sent us down a rabbit hole, but I chose not today. Maybe tomorrow.
Next time.
You know, I think when I think about the title of our webinar and how to scale SEL, the biggest thing that I want people to walk away with is you just need to start. Pick a place and start. Start the conversation. Start building that group in. But we cannot wait any longer for people to choose to start. You're going to do this the same way you eat an elephant. You're going to take one bite at a time. Sometimes they're going to be big, nasty Whopper bites, and sometimes they're going to be a tiny little carrot bite. But you just have to start.
And I would add that the kids cannot wait. More importantly, our children are dealing with many, many, many mental health issues right now, and they cannot wait. They can't wait for us, the adults, to make that first step.
Yeah, there's a quote that captures that by Arthur Ashe. He says, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can.
I'm going to need you to repeat that for me a little bit later,
Yeah,
sir. I'm about to go
Yep.
At that last moment there.
Yeah.
Can we get that?
Now? Okay.
Yeah.
Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can.
writing it down.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I'm gonna show you this. Are you seeing the books now? All right. Fantastic. Plug for some books here. definitely pick up Essentials of Social Emotional Learning. There are 2 links in the chat. Also, Hacking Deficit Thinking. Drop that link in there as well. And don't forget to stop by lessonsforsel.com and see what's going on there. And finally, stop by Rochelle's Twitter page and say hello. Send her a tweet. Reach out.
Any fancy books or webcasts or anything, but you're more than welcome to come hang out with me in the Twitterverse.
Absolutely. With that, if next Tuesday, we're going to be talking about SEL specifically as it pertains to gifted audiences. So we'd love to have you join us for that one. And I want to thank our fantastic panelists for a very engaging conversation today. Everybody listening, please keep an eye on your email for links and recordings and certificates. And thanks for your time. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Andy.
Take
Bye,
care.
guys. Have a great day.
Take
Bye.
care.